In the dimly lit, cyclopean streets of Dunwich, a sense of unutterable dread settled over the remaining inhabitants like a shroud, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. The once-quaint village, now a mere shadow of its former self, lay in ruins, its people either fled in terror or consumed by the eldritch horror that had been unleashed upon the world. The air was heavy with an otherworldly presence, a malevolent force that seemed to seep from the very pores of the earth itself, poisoning all it touched. As the last remnants of sunlight faded, casting the village in an eerie, flickering twilight, a small band of survivors huddled together in desperate conference. Their faces, gaunt and drawn, reflected the depths of their despair, for they knew that they stood as the only barrier between the monstrous, tentacled creature and the unsuspecting world beyond Dunwich. The creature, a spawn of the Old Ones, born of human and non-human stock, had grown in power and malevolence with each passing moment, its influence spreading like a stain across the landscape. Dr. Armitage, his eyes sunken, his voice laced with a quiet determination, spoke of the ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge that might, just might, hold the key to stopping the creature's relentless advance. His words, laced with a sense of urgency, painted a picture of a world on the brink of collapse, where the laws of nature no longer applied, and the very fabric of reality was torn asunder. The others listened, entranced, as he spoke of the whispered incantations, the arcane symbols, and the eldritch formulas that might, if performed correctly, banish the creature back to the depths of madness from which it had emerged. But as they spoke, the shadows deepened, and the wind began to pick up, carrying on its sighing breath the faint, piping whispers of the creature, a chilling, unearthly melody that seemed to come from all directions at once. The ground trembled beneath their feet, as if the earth itself was alive, and in torment, and the sky grew darker, as if night was falling not just over Dunwich, but over the entire world. The stars twinkled like cold, dead eyes in the darkening sky, and the moon, now a silver crescent, cast an eerie glow over the landscape. The ritual, if it was to be performed, would have to be done quickly, for the creature was growing in power by the minute, its influence spreading, a palpable, suffocating presence that threatened to consume them all. The survivors, their hearts heavy with foreboding, knew that they were taking a terrible risk, for if the ritual failed, they would be doomed, and the world would be plunged into an abyss of madness and terror. But they also knew that they had no choice, for to do nothing would be to invite certain destruction, and the thought of the creature, unopposed, rampaging across the world, was too terrible to contemplate. As they made their way through the deserted streets to the site of the ritual, the whispers grew louder, the piping melody more intense, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe like living things. The air was thick with an eerie, pulsating energy, and the ground trembled, as if the earth was being torn apart from the inside out. The stars seemed to pulse in time with the creature's whispers, and the moon cast an eerie, silver glow over the landscape, as if it was being drawn into the ritual against its will. The ritual itself, a complex, arcane dance of words and symbols and gestures, was performed with a desperate, frenzied intensity, as if the very fate of the world depended on its success. The words, ancient and forbidden, seemed to hang in the air like a challenge, a defiance of the creature and the old ones who had spawned it. The symbols, drawn in blood and dust and ashes, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if they were alive and feeding off the terror of the participants. The gestures, intricate and complex, seemed to weave a spell of protection and banishment around the participants, as if they were trying to keep the creature and its influence at bay. But as the ritual reached its climax, the creature, sensing its chance, made its move, bursting forth from the shadows in a riot of tentacles and writhing, pulsing flesh. The survivors, frozen in terror, could only watch as the creature, its malevolent presence overwhelming, began to disrupt the ritual, its influence spreading like a stain across the landscape. The words, the symbols, the gestures all seemed to fail as the creature's power grew and grew, until it was a living, breathing thing, a monster of unutterable horror. The consequences of failure were too terrible to contemplate, as the creature, unopposed, began to rampage across the world, leaving destruction and madness in its wake. The survivors, few and scattered, were left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of the horror that had been unleashed upon the world. The ritual, a desperate last-ditch attempt to stop the creature, had failed, and now all that was left was to try and survive in a world gone mad. The darkness that followed was absolute, a living, breathing thing that seemed to have a presence of its own. The stars were gone, the moon was hidden, and the world was plunged into an abyss of madness and terror. The creature was everywhere, its influence spreading like a stain across the landscape, until it was impossible to tell what was real and what was not. The survivors, few and scattered, were left to navigate this twisted, nightmarish world where the laws of nature no longer applied and the very fabric of reality was torn asunder. In this desolate, post-apocalyptic landscape, the survivors were forced to confront the ultimate horror that had been unleashed upon the world. The creature, a monstrous, tentacled thing, was the embodiment of all their deepest fears, a living, breathing thing that seemed to have a presence of its own. The ritual, a desperate last-ditch attempt to stop the creature, had failed, and now all that was left was to try and survive in a world gone mad. The final confrontation was a desperate last-ditch attempt to stop the creature and restore some semblance of order to the world. The survivors, few and scattered, were forced to use all their knowledge and skills to try and defeat the creature and banish it back to the depths of madness from which it had emerged. The battle was fierce and intense, with the creature using all its power and influence to try and destroy the survivors and the world they represented. In the end, it was a desperate last-ditch attempt that saved the world from the creature's malevolent influence. The survivors, using all their knowledge and skills, were able to defeat the creature and banish it back to the depths of madness from which it had emerged. The world was saved, but the cost was high, and the survivors were left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of the horror that had been unleashed upon the world. The ritual, a desperate last-ditch attempt to stop the creature, had succeeded, but the consequences of the creature's influence would be felt for generations to come.